Virtually every leader in the health freedom movement talks about the insecurity of the food supply as one of the primary avenues of tyranny. Our family has rigorously sourced our foods for over a decade, and one of our favorite sources is Farm Match. And specifically, if you are in San Diego, Real Food Club PMA. My kids are literally made from their maple breakfast sausage and the amazing carnitas we make from their pasture-raised pork. But from regeneratively raised raw dairy products to the organic potato chips made in regenerative lard or anything you might get at your local farmer's market, our family's overall wellness and the security of our food lies in the hands of Farm Match and Real Food Club. I am so excited to be sharing about Farm Match and Real Food Club to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first order. You can find the code and link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. The desire to go off-grid and disconnect from the system was one of the single most important initiatives any household could have. Whether it is growing our own food, becoming sovereign in our energy production and usage, establishing alternative communication strategies, or digging a well and finding the infinity of primary water. About a year and a half ago, our family moved into our new home in North County, San Diego on 3 acres of precious land here in America's finest county. One of the first things we did was hire Food Forest Abundance to design a regenerative layout for our land. From the different trees to plant differing berry guilds and synergistic pollinators, to consulting on alternative energy, collecting our rainwater, and even helping us find our local well guy, Food Forest Abundance and their Freedom Farm Academy has been pivotal in the gradual and consistent evolution of our household towards true sovereignty from the system. They have helped us simplify a very confusing process and helped us create the design of our dreams. It doesn't matter if you have 3 acres, dozens or hundreds, or just a small yard. Food Forest Abundance has something to offer you and your family in your journey to move your entire household off-grid. Use the code TheFutureGen to work with the absolute best in the world, Food Forest Abundance, to create your own freedom farm and get off-grid at a discounted rate. Welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom, and this episode with Gail Macrae, former nurse, or still a nurse, formerly in the system, essentially stepped down as a result of just failing at being able to facilitate a balance between wellness and symptom-based care, and ultimately COVID and her experience in COVID and her speaking out during COVID largely ended her career with the conventional system. However, this conversation is so important. Medical kidnapping is by far either front and center in your mindset as your kids have to navigate, say, an emergency or go to the ER or something like that. Many parents express to me the fact that they feel hesitant even to go get care because of who we are, right? Who we are as natural focused parents, who we are who believe that the body heals itself, who we are who just believe in health and medical freedom and the respecting of our bodies and the respecting of our choices. Or it is a blind spot where you still kind of live in that world where you're just like, hey, nothing bad's going to happen. If it does, God forbid. The conversation that Gail Macrae and I just had was one of the most pragmatic, one of the most freeing for me personally, but for society at large today. Remnant Healthcare, Remnant Nursing, advocating for you, almost like having a doula on the phone if you ever need to go into the system, but also just this entire alternative system that is created to even provide primary care, to even provide holistically focused care, functional medicine-based care, concierge care. This episode is so good and so important. And I need you to share it as far and wide as you can, because at the end of the day, we all know that our kids are the single most important why behind every single deal. I know it is for me. And even myself here in the state of California, here as a clinically, in my opinion, one of the best chiropractors in the world, I have hesitations, especially when my kids just wreck themselves all the time. And if you ever need the system, Gail has some solutions that are so powerful and so important that if parents had that today, a peace of mind would envelop your family in ways that I promise you I have yet to have on this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you share it far and wide, and I hope you put into practice many of the things that Gail shared. Gail, you're amazing. Thank you for your episode. Thank you for your share. I'm grateful that you exist, and I'm grateful that you're stepping into the fullest expression of who you are as a person and as a spiritual being. I genuinely love and appreciate you all. Please share and enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Future Generations podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve, do better now, and for our future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. I have with me a very special guest. I would say that over the last definitely 4 years, but I would say probably 6 to 8 years in my practice, the number one healthcare provider that has been essentially flooding into our practice is our nurses. And it's amplified over the course of the last 4 years for obvious reasons. Gail Macrae, still a nurse, but who stepped away from essentially the medical field after failing to bridge the gap, right? That's something that I see so commonly. It's so amazing because nurses often have this intuitive understanding that wellness, that lifestyle, that patient empowerment, informed consent is an essential inherent part to healthcare, but challenging, right? Challenging to bridge the gap between that and symptom-based care. Ultimately, it was COVID that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of your relationship with the system. But Gail, I would love for you to introduce yourself. I would love our audience to get to know you both personally and professionally.
Thank you so much, Stanton. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And chiropractic is such an invaluable area of wellness that I've known for years and years and years is just such an important part of this puzzle. So I graduated from nursing school here in California in 2012 with a BSN from Cal State East Bay. And I went directly into acute care. I worked in ICU, telemetry, and open heart, cardiac unit. My passion has always been babies. And I knew right away after my labor and delivery rotation that I wanted to become a certified nurse midwife. So after about 6 years in the field, I returned to school at the beginning of COVID. In that 6-year period between graduation and my return to grad school, I spent a year delivering babies in rural Africa, which I think really not only my background and childhood experiences, I was homeschooled. So I have many different life experiences that kind of put me into a position of open-mindedness, curiosity, unbridled exploration of the world. One of the things that I really feel is so important to understand how I have come to stand in my strength and power as an informed individual was just my recognition of the power of our own personal value and self-worth that I developed as a high schooler being homeschooled, and how differently I saw and experienced myself versus my friends in high school who went to public school and they really based their value and self-worth on the acceptance of their peers. I feel like that was such an important and difficult life lesson at that high school age. But ultimately, it set me up as a professional to really be able to see my role as a primary care provider as really independent from the systems that I was licensed by. And I took authority over the ownership of my role as a patient's primary care provider. And that was something that I witnessed during COVID to be probably the biggest fallout
Wow.
in the quality of practitioners that we see in the medical field, in that they are so concerned about fitting in and about following the rules. And, they're afraid of losing their income. So
Yeah.
they make compromised decisions. They don't very thoroughly evaluate the research in situations where, especially with the last several years, when you're dealing with novel technologies and protocols. Like protocols is new to medicine. I mean, relatively new. 50 years ago, 20 years ago, practitioners weren't using protocols. And so when you're a person like me that's extremely curious and very independent, and what I do is I actually look at the protocols and I look at the data that's used to promote the protocols. And when it doesn't line up, I don't have a problem, you know, altering my recommendations, which unfortunately I found to be very rare and unusual. So those kinds of experiences really formed me as a practitioner and as a person. But when people ask me, like, why is it that you have seen some of these things that are happening in the medical field and you have the capacity to talk about them openly, whereas most of my colleagues don't, those are a lot of those reasons why. And I think they're extremely important to talk about because this is the world that we live in, where these public institutions, these schools are teaching our children things that, may completely change the future of humanity.
It's
Pattern.
and that's not hyperbole, right? Like it's literally what's on what's at stake today, right? Is literally the trajectory for humanity in that we hear every day. When I get to speak publicly, I will ask, about many things. One of which is like specifically about COVID, right? Like, raise your hand if you know someone who was like harmed or killed, or they lost their livelihood. And you fill in the blank. It's not just the shot. It's not just lockdowns. It's not just masks. It's not just distancing. It's not isolation. It's not Zoom school. It's all of those things, right? All those things were a trajectory change for so many of us, especially our kids, which is kind of, despite the many paths that we can go just from your intro, which is, medical kidnapping is something that I feel so like called to talk about, because I think you're talking about how, like, whether it's just the lack of informed consent or just the gaslighting and bullying, and then just the dogma into like these particular protocols that literally killed people. Like, it's gnarly. It's gnarly to think that that's not just normalized, that was celebrated, that was reimbursed by third-party systems in greater fashions, that was driving a lot of revenue for people, not only in the system at large, but, individual pocketbooks. Like, it's crazy to see how that happens. And we have a whole generation of children that are going to be moving through, adulthood in these systems that hopefully we can arm them if they ever need the system, but also like arm parents today to empower their kids. But I think it's amazing that you're able to speak out, and that's something that I noticed just being connected to you through different avenues, different colleagues of yours, different groups that we're collaborating with, and then also just like these kind of back-end alternative but very foundational systems that often give people vehicles to find remedy in those types of things. But I just first wanted to applaud you just for your bravery and for the truth that you speak out with, and getting to meet Leif, your husband, and kind of knowing where you guys are coming from. Now knowing that you're a homeschooler, that you were homeschooled, but then also knowing that you have witnessed developing countries, like birth in developing countries. That is also, from what I know, just based on my own research, is one of those kind of sacred experiences that you just recognize that life with the system, dare we say, enslaved and shackled to the system, versus those that largely operate completely free of the system, is a consciousness thing. It's an administrative thing. And I just applaud you for being brave enough to speak out for those, because I think a lot of people are stuck, right? A lot of people think that there's a system, they pay for the system, so therefore I look for the system and I only look for providers in the system, and then I see what's reimbursed, and they get to the end, they're like, I don't want that. I don't want that doctor. I don't want that treatment. I don't like their evaluation. And so what then do people do, you know? And so I think it's awesome that you're kind of a pioneer in a lot of these conversations, which is great.
Yeah, people feel stuck. It's interesting. I get that question all the time, like, how do you do what you're doing? And I just tell them, it really is a mindset. We really teach ourselves to be stuck, and we surround ourselves with people that are stuck.
Wow.
And words create. You create your stuckness. And I work very hard to unstick myself. And I will tell you, spending many years in this lifestyle, it is a lifestyle. It's not easy. All of the gymnastics that happen in here to choose this type of existence, they are very overwhelming at times.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a lot of what I see with people when we talk about this, is like a lot of people just don't necessarily know how to exercise the courage to take those steps to try and discover what they can and can't create. So the reason I kind of went into all of that prelude to medical kidnapping is really because all of those types of things set me up to be able to identify things like medical kidnapping in my career. I noticed it relatively early on. I kind of considered myself that one practitioner as a nurse in the hospital, just working as an RN before grad school, that would be able to connect with these people who thought they didn't have options, and to be able to offer them options, and to be able to talk to them about things like chiropractic, herbal remedies, cleansing, different, especially with chronic illness and disease, right? The Western model, completely abysmally fails at managing chronic illness and disease. So that was kind of why I kept myself in that system. But I witnessed a lot of fallout with, especially in labor and delivery. And that's why I chose to go into that field, because specifically women were not given informed consent.
Yeah.
And at that moment in life, when you're creating a family, I mean, those are that new being's first moments on earth where, they're not given, they're not respected and honored, and they're not given informed consent, and they're not supported with love and respect. And so I noticed that in nursing school, and that's why I chose to go into that field. And that's also why I chose to become a medical advocate. So after COVID, after seeing what happened in the hospitals and not being willing to basically compromise my ethics and morals, which is what we were being forced to do. I was being forced to basically lie, hide, cover up, and omit atrocities. And I would still to this day call COVID protocols medical murder. I mean, we were literally like enforcing protocols that caused people to die. And people think that their loved ones died of COVID. Like, they didn't die of COVID. They died of the protocols that we were implementing. So that really catapulted me into advocacy. And I just happened to have, it's funny how it happened last year in September with this case with Hope and her daughter Autumn. I just happened to have been called by one of the nurses I work with, an organization called Remnant Nursing. It's now Remnant Healthcare, an extraordinary organization. It's another PMA, private-based organization, where they're trying to offer treatment and support and advocacy to people around the country who need support in hospitals. All of us working there are nurses and other practitioners who have left the Western model of care during COVID. Basically, I'm pretty sure every single one of us left during COVID. And now we do advocacy and support work to try and help protect people. So I was called in on this little girl's case. Autumn at the time had just turned 4 years old. It was about a week after her fourth birthday, and she started having, her brother had severe diarrhea for just a couple days. It was a standard kind of childhood diarrhea episode, and then she got it. And unfortunately, hers was quite a bit worse. She ended up having episodes of diarrhea about every 20 minutes for 3 to 4 days before her amazing mother, Hope. I mean, this woman, so she's family marriage therapist, and her husband is a police officer. I mean, they're, very loving and supportive and responsible and respectable human beings in California. Hope's first child was Autumn. She had 2 more infants. So there are 3 little children that she was caring for when this little girl developed this episode of diarrhea. And they wanted her to just go in for some IV support. And the hospital just basically coerced them into admitting her. And the first, they transferred her to Stanford Children's. It's there's a proper name for that. It's I think something Packard in the South Bay. But it is Stanford Children's Hospital, and they basically, within the first presentation of the doctors to Hope, they told her that Autumn was going to be their test run of how to treat this symptom called HUS. They improperly diagnosed her with a symptom, not a symptom. They improperly diagnosed her with HUS, which is a type of renal neurological development after E. coli. So a child will get E. coli, have severe diarrhea, and then develop a neurological and renal response to it. It has to do with inflammation of the vasculature around the kidneys. And so she only had one of the 3 symptoms required to diagnose HUS, but they diagnosed her with it anyways. It is my professional opinion that she never had HUS, and they used that to push these protocols. They put her on diuretics, 3 diuretics that are adult medications. So this little girl had never even had a dose of Tylenol, and they started drugging her with it's a renal cocktail used for adults. And they gave it to this little girl who was about 35 pounds. Their medications were Lasix, Diarel, and amnioflin. Lasix, I don't know if you know anything about these medications, but
I don't.
Lasix is it's so powerful and potent, and it has very high risk for side effects because it causes your body to dump minerals, which is eventually what ended up happening. This story is so long and terrible. She was hospitalized for about a month. About a week into the hospitalization, because of that drug cocktail, she went into renal failure.
Wow.
And so that was when the family contacted us. And I was called on to consult on the case. So at that point, that the sweet little girl had already had an IV placed for dialysis because she'd been put into renal failure, and they had improperly placed the IV, and so she'd been bleeding all night. She was forced to get a transfusion. The hospital refused to honor the parents' wishes to allow the father to donate blood. It was a complete catastrophe from start to finish. And even when I came on the case, it's difficult because I feel that when you wait till the last minute to establish a relationship with an advocate like myself, it's hard for the family because they are hearing what I have to say out of one side of their mouth, and then they're hearing what these doctors and hospitals have to say out of the other side of their mouth. And they're trying to protect their child who's having a life-threatening medical experience. And so it was very challenging. I really feel for the family because I know that they were really trying to do the best that they could in the situation that they had had. And that's
Right.
the sad part, is that we have, people wait until they're in an emergency to develop a relationship with an advocate or a practitioner to be supportive. And at that point, like our ability to really support is really negatively impacted. So,
And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear that at all. And at that point, I'm just thinking, an iatrogenic condition, situation, life-threatening, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe we didn't need it right before. Maybe we didn't need life-saving protocols. Obviously, if you give someone a protocol that they don't need, it's malpractice, it's misdiagnosis, and but then they are essentially in an emergent situation. And then what do you do? It's like, oh wait, I actually have to trust the people that actually caused this thing to some degree. And it's this lose situation that is so, I think, where you come from, you can sense that, right? You can sense that long before that situation manifests in the way that it does and down spirals in the way that it does, because you've been offered different opportunities to actually just have self-awareness, have more, conscious choice, have more, executive function in your own nervous system. And yet at the same time, it's like parents we don't know what we don't know sometimes, right? I find that with my son, like we were in a situation that largely could have ended up like that. And I have been in practice 13 years, and my wife, I watched her hear a prognosis from the doctor. I watched her whole consciousness just dump into the ground, fear, anxiety, everything. Tell me what to do. Yes, we'll schedule for the next thing. And for me, I was like, wait, we're going to get a second opinion. We're walking out. Like it was an immediate thing where we weren't even going down the path of testing yet, because I just had this gut sense that, and it's not anything against my wife at all. It's just to say that I feel like I've been prepping for these moments for a long enough period of time, but that's me. I've been in practice 13 years. You have a lifetime of experiences of understanding that our choices and knowing when you're being kind of pushed into, whether it's gaslighting or just straight coercion into the system, that we have parents who just want the best for their kids, who tell me every day that sometimes they're like, what do I do? I'm like, actually, you should go to the ER. Actually, you should go to urgent care. Actually, it's actually at that situation where, yes, I'm a great doc, but I'm a chiropractor. I am not an emergent provider. And therefore, I'm not the fire department. You actually need the fire department right now. But there is this hesitation because so many of our parents are aware now, especially because of COVID. And they, in many respects, are leaving states like California because we know that everything is, exponentially more crazy here. Doctors are more renegade here. Systems are more renegade here. Most people don't know, but they're becoming aware that CPS in the hospitals isn't actually for you. And law enforcement in hospitals isn't for you. It's actually to enforce what CPS is actually dictating to some degree. And in the end, it's like, what do parents do, in that situation? Yeah, it's because you have so much faith in life. We have so much confidence in our own in our own choices and how we take care of our children. But then when you're in the system where you should almost immediately advocate for yourself before you're going into the system, because you never know what wrong turn it could go. And then all of a sudden, you're in Hope's situation. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I definitely will just tap into the mom hormones here for a minute because I didn't realize what mom hormones did to women until I had a child.
Yeah.
And they are just so profoundly powerful. And that was, I think, one of the main reasons why I had so much empathy for Hope, because I do have children and I understand, she doesn't have the expertise that I have. And my husband will tell you, and I will tell you too, I don't know where my family would be if I didn't have the expertise that I have.
Wow.
It's been so profoundly invaluable for my family, and for my friends, my friends and my loved ones too. And I think that's a lot of the reason too why I'm so grateful that you're doing this podcast, because I really want people to understand that there are practitioners like us out there who genuinely understand and care. And we really do want to try and support families in states like California, where there's such a lack of trust and an uncertainty. If I had come on into Hope's case, a week or 2 weeks earlier, and I would have been a friend of hers, and she could have just called me and said, "Hey, Gail, what do I do?" I would have said, "Hey, give your baby some Espelarti and hydrate her." And I don't think you're going to have to go to the hospital. And it would have been avoided. That was actually one of the things about my grad program that I absolutely adore was they gave us for every educational module for my practitioner program, we got a whole section on alternatives to pharmaceuticals. So I got all the research and data that we had to support alternative therapies. And so I have a lot of this, there's a lot that I understand about what we can do. What can we do if we want to avoid pharma? And even in emergencies, there's a lot that can be done to prevent extenuating circumstances. And there's a lot of practitioners, like you said, that are now stepping into that. Unfortunately, I just am hopeful that this podcast will help people to understand, don't wait. Don't wait to develop relationships and establish trust, because if you can just have someone to call and just say, "Hey, I just need 5 minutes of your time," it can really change the trajectory for your family's lives. And that's what Hope and Autumn experienced, their entire life trajectory. This sweet little girl, she was in a very dark place for probably on and off for about 2 weeks during the time when I was advocating with them. The hospital had induced, so by over diuresing her, so myself and a pediatric specialist that I had brought on to help out with her case, because I didn't do pediatrics at the time. My career was med-surg and babies. So pediatrics is the one little part of the population that I have limited experience with.
Right.
But I brought on a pediatric specialist, and we were able to restart her kidneys with some supportive measures. And we basically hornswoggled the hospital into trying them because she was because the diuretics put her into renal failure. So we got them to agree to switch courses. We got her out of renal failure. We got her urinating again, and then the hospital sent her into severe electrolyte imbalance by forcing her to have too much to drink and then giving her different diuretics that put her into an electrolyte imbalance and caused her, in my professional opinion, she diuresed, I believe it was about 300 mLs of fluid every hour and a half, which ended up being like a couple thousand liters in like an 8-hour period, which is even dangerous for an adult. And they weren't supporting her electrolyte balance. She ended up developing a seizure, ended up having to intubate her because of that. They tried to slap on a new diagnosis and didn't even address the fact that they'd failed to properly support her electrolytes during that extreme fluid loss episode. But that was the next extraordinary thing that happened. And it was during that period of time when the hospital, because Hope and her family at that point were, so distraught by everything that had happened, they were trying to say, like, we can't give her any more Lasix because it's causing so many problems with this child. The hospital called CPS over that. There was that. Their delay in agreeing to start a PIC line because, who wants to put a permanent, semi-permanent line, from the arm into the heart of this 4-year-old little girl for antibiotics because they failed to test the sputum when they intubated her and she developed a pneumonia from the intubation. And that was another thing. It's like I did everything I could to try. So here's one of the things that I'll tell people, like, this is something that it's hard to do, but people need to understand how important it is to have an advocate and have them on the phone every single time a practitioner enters the room. If a nurse comes in and starts talking to the family, or if a doctor comes in and starts talking to the family, put them on hold, call your advocate, have them on the phone. Because if I'm not on the phone to hear these conversations and to be able to intervene and, support a trusting relationship, then I can't really, my advice isn't necessarily going to impact, this hospital care experience without that personal relationship development with the staff. And so that was something, I really like to people to understand. We need to be there. We need to be on the phone. We need to be present. We need the doctor to know who we are so that we can establish these relationships and be able to, act in your best interest. It really does come back. So this is, there's a doctor here who I worked with towards the end of Autumn's case. And he's been doing advocacy work and getting people out of hospitals for over 30 years now. And that was basically, when I talked to him after the fact to debrief over this case, that was really what he had to say, was that if the trust relationship between the families and the hospital has been broken, there's really nothing that positive that can happen. And at that point, you either need to get a new care team, or B, transfer out of that hospital.
Yeah.
Because you can't negotiate with these people when there's no trust.
Right.
So that's when CPS ended up getting called. And it was really tragic. I definitely felt that the hospital used CPS to not just force their agenda and their protocols, but also to cover their backs because they were trying to justify the mistakes that they had made in Autumn's care. And by involving CPS, it was almost like a way to kind of fearmonger the parents into giving up more rights and believing that they were wrong. It's a manipulative type of experience, but it was certainly traumatizing. I was present at the court hearing with CPS, and the judge would not even allow. So there were about 20 people who showed up to that meeting, and this was Hope, her Autumn's mother, was in the bathroom at the hospital to take this call because she couldn't leave her child's bedside, or else they probably wouldn't have let her in. And out of the 20 of us who showed up, there were several attorneys. We all showed up to advocate for Autumn. There were several attorneys. There were myself and the pediatric specialist who had been advocates on the case at that point for 3 weeks. And the judge wouldn't even allow us to talk. I basically had to I opened my mic and had to demand an audience and explain who I was and why I was there to address the concerns that were being brought up. Unfortunately, and I believe this to be the case in most situations, CPS really didn't care what Hope said. They didn't care what I said. They didn't care that I was a licensed professional who had a contract with Hope to act as her advocate, as a healthcare advocate and advisor. It was really just them going through the procedure of forcing medical protocols down the throats of the family members.
So many people have asked me what I do to stay mentally and physically resilient in the midst of the unending polarization, fear, and tyranny. Literally nothing has made a bigger impact for me than daily cold plunging. 3 minutes, 37 degrees every morning for over a year now. My friends, I wanted to tell you about the Edge Tub from Edge Theory Labs. Their portable and inflatable tub can alternate between an ice bath and hot tub. I've been regenerating the benefits of cold plunging every day, like better sleep, better focus, and more energy. We have had some really amazing interviews to learn more about cold exposure. But in the meantime, I invite you to check out Edge Theory Labs' website to learn more. I'm also happy to share an exclusive offer for Future Generations podcast listeners, $150 off using the code TheFutureGen. You can find more info in the show notes. Get cold. What's up, FG fam? One of the single best companies whose products have supported the optimal wellness of our family for years is Earthly Wellness. Kate TG and her team have stood for truth, health, and freedom in ways that paved the way for so many of us. They experienced heavy levels of censorship long before it was popularized, and they stood strong and persevered. Their products are clean, cost-effective, and honestly, they work for all ages. From supporting my wife, our oldest, and our little guy, Earthly Wellness provides products that have been foundational for our family for years. We especially use their products right before bedtime. Their Feel Better Fast and other herbal tinctures are some of the best in the world, as well as their amazing Goodnight Lotion, the magnesium oil, are mainstays. I am so excited to be partnering with Earthly to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first purchase. You can find the code link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. I would say this is on the... It's likely never front and center. I feel like it's front and center in my mind all the time because of just our backgrounds, right? But I would say most parents don't really think about this until maybe it's too late, like you're saying.
Yes.
I would say this is one of the primary reasons I've been saying for years now that California is the greatest producer of medical refugees, like in the United States, because of all of our laws over the last, decade or so, especially with regard to childhood shots. The threat of CPS is one of the reasons why a lot of parents like us maybe forego medical care sometimes, because even when they might know that their children might need it, because they don't want to lose their kids, or they don't want the threat of losing. They don't want to be in the situation where they might. And then the gaslighting and the coercion and the shame and all that stuff for sure, right? I guess my question would be I've never heard of Remnant, and I'm grateful to hear about Remnant. I'm already on your website. I'm already looking at different plans because I think at the end of the day, it's like I know for a fact that my family needs this type of service, because you just never know. You never know what could happen, what injuries, what emergencies, what accidents. And so what does that maybe pragmatically look like? Is it essentially becoming a member and then immediately starting to just build relationships with someone like you so that God forbid, we have a situation where we have to go to the ER where something does happen, and, you never know. Like I've spoken to many influencers of very, very, very major platforms who have left California specifically for this region, but this isn't just California. This is every hospital system. Every hospital system has some form of CPS that leverages essentially the mob, right? And the mob in the system. What does that look like? How do we?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Pretty much nailed it. So that's kind of basically what Remnant is. It's a platform where you can develop relationships. All of the neat thing is that there are a whole slew of practitioners, and we all communicate with each other and support each other. So regardless of what scenario you end up in, it's not just one practitioner that you have that will be there to offer support. Although you can definitely, and there are some extraordinary practitioners in this group. Many of them are, most of them, as a matter of fact, and that's what I will go ahead and add on here is that most of the practitioners who left the Western model of care were the experts. We were the ethical experts with the experience and the courage and confidence to challenge what we were being told and forced to do.
Wow.
And that's one of the other things about these new parallel organizations that are developing. In my professional opinion, you really are getting the cream of the crop when it comes to critical thinking, ethical, very, very caring practitioners. Many of them, there are multiple nurse practitioners in our organization. So, there's experts in every area. And yeah, so you can develop these relationships. As a matter of fact, more than anything, what Remnant offers too is just a line to call for whatever. We offer primary care options and advocacy. And so as a matter of fact, one of the cases that I'm potentially going to be helping out on is somebody who's getting a joint replacement and they don't want to go to the hospital alone. So they're going to get a group of us together to come and do shifts in the hospital and then go home to help her rehab. And what excites me about that is that in addition to having all of the Western expertise, as you noted, nurses, we are much more holistic. We all have multiple alternative training modalities. So I just finished homeopathy. Most of our nurses are functional medicine trained. I'm about to start really exciting new training in something called biofield tuning, which is,
I love it.
Probably heard of it.
I love it.
It's a requirement for Remnant nurses is to have multiple other modalities of wellness. Yeah, it's a great, there's a lot of organizations that I'm affiliated with, but when it comes to advocacy and promoting wellness, I think that Remnant is probably my go-to.
I think it's amazing, honestly, because we know, right? Like I've patients that come into my practice, new parents, and they're like, well, we can't homeschool, so we're going to start vaccinating. And I'm like, your child is days old. Do you know that it's not, that's kind of like I don't say this like directly to them, but it's like a false dilemma, right? If I cannot homeschool, then therefore I must vaccinate, right? And it's usually like just reminding these young parents that over the last 4 years, people have been building these alternative systems that are so fast, like they are so quickly building this infrastructure. It's not it's not the beast of conventional education, but there are pods everywhere. There are multiple organizations just in the county of San Diego that if you are more faith-based, if you're more STEM-based, if you're more this or that, like there's so many offerings today already, just 4 years after COVID, right? And I feel a little bit ignorant to the fact that I didn't know you guys really existed. I knew you were amazing. I've seen you on multiple platforms many, many times, and obviously we're connected in other ways. And this is one of the first times that I'm a little bit distracted from talking to you because I'm like trying to devalue your website, because at the end of the day, I know this speaks to the heart of what so many of our people in our community, both the brick and mortar, like in-person practice, but also like the podcast listeners around the world, are all parents skirting the system somehow. And in the end, it's not that you want to go into the system. It's if you have to at any point, have an advocate. But if you, like you said, I think another practical step was having like a regular visit with some sort of conventional provider builds the reputation of the parent. If you were to need the system, that Remnant also offers that as well. And by the way, those conventional appointments with, conventionally licensed providers could be very much in the holistic realm and
Absolutely.
give you solutions that you're looking for anyways. This is unbelievable. It's amazing. I love it on so many levels.
Yeah, that's really the goal too. That's really actually what I love most about, even though it was very hard to leave the system. And I walked away from my graduate degree too. I'd finished the degree, and my school wouldn't let me complete my clinical hours because I refused to take the COVID shots.
Wow.
I submitted my natural immunity to them with something like 200 peer-reviewed studies of, the efficacy of natural.
That was your CNM?
Yes. And WHMP. It was a double
Gotcha.
nurse practitioner.
Wow.
And they wouldn't accept it. And but these steps of walking away and then beginning to create these new systems, it's true that we really are pioneering this new model. And ultimately, that's my long-term goal, is to really create a platform, a national or internationally based platform, where we can offer practitioners and patients a private organizational platform with, it's not just to offer people the options. It's because I personally am very aware, after what I went through, of the value and the necessity of having ethical standards. And it was like you said at the beginning of this call, we've taken an oath to do no harm, but somehow that oath has been overlooked, in my professional opinion, throughout the Western model of care. And I saw it so profoundly, powerfully in Hope's case. It was really interesting to watch, because I look at those practitioners and I'm seeing her decline, and clearly it's because of these medical interventions, and they just want to keep pushing other interventions. And when you really step back and stop and just resonate and meditate on this foundational concept of do no harm.
Yeah.
I mean, I just say it to myself over and over again, do no harm, do no harm. What does that mean? On a cellular level, on the way that I engage with my clients, every single interaction I had with the practitioners in her case, they were not applying that concept of do no harm. And you can see it, you can feel it, you can see it. And that's something that needs to be reinstated into these foundational organizations for development. We have to come back to the ethical standard of not just do no harm, but respect and sovereignty, autonomy, and all of these concepts that are being stripped. And ultimately, that's why I really support an advocacy as to bridge the gap until we get these parallel systems
Right.
up and running, where we can offer a full scope of care. Because, like you said, as a chiropractor, like there are emergency situations sometimes if you can't address, I want to address those.
Yep.
I want to really nail down full scope of care,
Yep.
collaboration,
Yep.
and a foundation of not so in nursing we call them our scope of practice, right? You have a scope, you have ethical, like
Standard of care.
ethical standards that must be upheld. And if we can do it correctly and really nail down these concepts with every practitioner who comes into these roles, we can find a way to replace the Western model of care with more holistic and respectful options. But in the meantime, advocacy,
Right.
networking, it's a must.
It's honestly, I feel like my shoulders dropped just a little bit because, and you and I are connected through other ways, right? And we're obviously kind of navigating other ways to kind of understand like how to preserve our rights and how to essentially revest title to our own estate.
Yeah.
Which, we'll have those experts come on too, because I want to have those conversations about those other aspects of freedom, right? Of sovereignty. But in the interim, like you're right, I think this provides an avenue that I believe virtually every single one of my patients will take a sigh of relief. Every single one of our listeners who doesn't know that you exist or Remnant Nursing exists or Remnant Healthcare exists, that we can recognize that, God forbid, something does happen and we have to be somehow in the belly of the beast, that there are advocates that we can literally call every time somebody, like I never really would have thought of that like every time somebody comes in that's going to say something for whatever reason, that an advocate can be on the phone to, one, build relationship, preserve that trusting relationship, and maybe bridge the gap to that informed consent that is actually just a God-given right. It's not something, I mean, every single conflict in history that, split time in two for that nation or for whatever, form of tyranny that was essentially trying to blanket and envelop and tsunami wave whatever populace that they were trying to, that the freedom that birthed out of those conflicts, because that's our birthright, is largely at stake today. Or I should say, and there are people who exist today in these alternative systems infrastructurally that you could have a strong relationship with, a clinical doctor-patient, provider-patient relationship, one of the most sacred relationships in the history of time, that can advocate for you should you need that type of care, right, to some degree. Or be almost like your doula, right? Like we've been working with people in the birthing world for a long time. Mothers have come to us for a long time. One of the first things we recommend, sometimes in lieu of chiropractic, is a doula, because you need someone in that system to just advocate for mom. And it can't always be dad, because dads, we have the lens, right? And we lose I lose my clinical mind for about 6 weeks after my kids are born. And that's normal, right? Because I'm just going to be a human. I'm just going to be a dad. And so there are advocates that we know infrastructurally exist. And I just didn't know that you guys did to the degree that you do. And this is by far, one of my most pragmatic but powerful episodes. It's awesome. I really appreciate this time with you, Gail.
Absolutely.
What would you say, given all the things that you shared, obviously alternative systems, coming through, if you could say, based upon what you see your mission and your purpose and how you're being driven, inspired today, should that continue to kind of make manifest its success, what would you say the world looks like? What is maybe one thing that you envision for the world, should you, Remnant, and a lot of these things that you're working on find the success that they will?
I definitely think that stepping into our power and sovereignty has to be the foundational core of how change.
I love that.
Um, I was surrounded by colleagues who couldn't do that. And it is the distinguishing quality between myself and 98% of the Western trained practitioners out there. Applying that principle to critical thinking and the courage to stand up. I guess I love to kind of circle back to this place of where I am today. So if you were to look at my life 4 years ago when I was kind of more or less forcing myself into a square hole as a round peg.
Yeah.
I was suffocating my true spiritual calling by doing what I was doing. And there were little rewards, right? Because I got to see small successes in the hospital setting when I got the opportunity to advocate for people. But they were really, at the end of the day, not enough to actually meet my core needs as a care provider. And, people always say, oh, I'm so sorry that you got fired and that you lost your graduate degree and all these things. And I just can't help but responding by saying, I gave up some things to gain so much more, because today in my life now, I'm actually following my calling entirely.
I love it.
I'm actually developing relationships and working on building these systems that I envision to be the future of wellness. I personally don't believe that humanity will be able to survive if we don't begin imagining, executing, creating these new systems, and giving up what I once had has offered me the opportunity to start creating these systems that are so badly needed. So, it really is what I would say, like we talked about this earlier too, it's perspective. What do I really need? I don't need a 6-figure salary from a hospital that forces me to compromise my integrity. What really fills my soul. And I think about this a lot in regards to my children, right? So when I talk about like, well, why did I do this? I did this for my children because I don't want them seeing me accepting, unethical, potentially criminal decisions and actions in my life, because that's what I'm showing them is appropriate and acceptable. And I think about that for them long term, like what, I'm teaching them how to step into this world as leaders and in honor and in respect for themselves. And I don't think there's anything in life more important than that.
Right.
The example that I'm setting for my children and following my calling, I'll say this last thing is that by saying no to the unethical behaviors that were going on in the system and then turning around and advocating for the truth, I feel that I took my soul back.
Yeah.
I was compromising my soul. Like there's this spiritual body that I was selling, to stay in this system that I thought, I could work through. And when I finally stood up and said, enough, I have taken back my power, my soul, my abilities, and I've showed my children how to do that. And it's probably, it has been one of the most challenging decisions of my life, but also the most rewarding. And I wouldn't give it back for anything.
I love it. I love it. Some of my best teachers would say I would rather have the whole world against me than my own soul, but then the more I looked at the last 4 years, like even with regard to censorship, how much do we self-censor more than any social media company or fact checker could censor us, right? That we do it to ourselves already, in personal relationships, in our own lives, and living, in alignment with our own highest values. Like we do it all the time. And so for you to exemplify that for your kids, I believe that to be, if we could normalize that, right? If we could normalize when moms and parents, dads, we just step into our fullest expression of who we are and exemplify that for our kids so that they can emulate that for their kids in the future. Like, I don't think there's a better world than that,
Right.
And so what a powerful message. I genuinely appreciate you sharing that, because we can get really practical about the system and really practical at advocating and protecting against, whatever, medical tyranny, all these aspects of things. But actually at the end of the day, it's the realization of who we are as humans, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that you're doing. How do people find you? How do people connect with you?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter. I'm not really that super techy. I'm working with Dr. Christiane Northrup on another.
I love it.
Yeah, it's a fun one too. So we're gathering expert witness testimony for medical practitioners to try and set the evidence legally for Nuremberg style.
Wow. Wow.
So that's standfirmnow.org. People can always reach me on standfirmnow.org. And then my name on Twitter is what is it? X is just Gail Macrae.
Okay.
And I do plan on opening a website for my own wellness practitioner advising platform. I haven't done it yet, but I am very busy with my kids and supporting my husband in law school too. So it's all about balancing and trying to make time for all of these things. And but yeah, Remnant Nursing, I am one of their practitioners, so people can always reach me through Remnant Nursing. Remnant Healthcare. So that's pretty much it. And I will continue to educate and work on developing these platforms. And I'm really excited to always offer advice and information and, developing these relationships for building a better system.
I love it. I love it. Gail, this has been one of my favorite episodes by far. I believe that what you are working with is of the highest need today, and I would say that in all of my online, offline, in-person doctor-patient conversations, this is going to be one that I believe that people are going to take action on the quickest, because it is literally at everybody's, it's either right at the tip of their tongue and right a priority for them now, or it's the biggest blind spot that they didn't think about. And I love it. And I love you for bringing it to us. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. And I know everybody who is trying to kind of write down all the links and everything like that, like we will have all those links in the show notes so that they can connect with you, but they can also connect with Remnant Healthcare as well.
Thank you so much, Stanton.
As you probably know, I'm the clinic director of the Future Generations Clinic of Chiropractic. I wanted to invite those of you in the greater San Diego area to come check us out. We expect and experience miracles in our office every day, and would love for you to experience the same, as well as your family, especially your kids. This month, we're offering our new patient package for just $67 for podcast listeners. The offer retails at $349 and includes an in-depth consultation where our patients literally tell us We know more about their family's health in the first 15 minutes than virtually every doctor on their healthcare team combined. Our state-of-the-art clinical workup, including Insight nervous system scans, full spine digital x-rays, and a functional exam. We also include a full report of your results, a customized plan to realize your greatest health potential, as well as your first adjustment in our office. Check out the link in the show notes for all the details and claim the offer. Love and appreciate you all.